I had the occasion of my life to meet Marina Oswald at the Cambridge conference. Both of our planes were delayed, and the next morning we drove to the airport with Abby Rockefeller. If you can imagine me, Abby Rockefeller, Marina Oswald in the car together, and I told Marina who I thought killed Kennedy, talking about the Joint Chiefs, and Marina said, "I always thought it was the Jews." That's a good response for a white Russian. But I also had the occasion in my life to meet Lee Oswald. And it was when Mae Brussell spoke at my university in 1972 or 1973. And after the talk, a guy ran out of the dark up to the few of us that were leaving campus at that point. And he said, "Mae, don't you know who I am?" And she turned and looked at him under the lamplight, and she said, "You look like Lee Harvey Oswald." And he did, if you added 30 years. And I'm talking about the Lee that he says is in the military, the guy in the hat and the little chubby face. And so he did look like him, and he looked down at his feet and he said, "A lot of people tell me that." And then he said, "Mae, I'm Don Norton." And she said, "Oh, Don Norton, John Judge. Don lives in Akron, Ohio. He said he might come down and see the talk." And she said, "Don's the only guy in the country that sends me money to do my research." And he looked down at his feet again and he said, "That's my conscience money." And I said, "Who the hell is this?" So I said, "Why don't you come down to the house and meet Mae? Talk to her, you have a cup of coffee." So he came down, but instead of asking any questions, she's sitting there knitting. He starts into a verbatim reproduction of the talk that Lee Harvey Oswald gave in the debate with the Inca guy, Ed Butler, on the radio. So he's signaling to Mae who he is. About midway through, she gets up and goes to bed, says, "I'm going to bed." I said, "Well, I do a lot of research. Be glad to send you some stuff. You have an address?" He said, "Just send it to me, General Delivery, Akron, Ohio." The next day, I'm driving with Mae in a car to go out to see the prisoner that she corresponded with. And she says, "Don't you think that was Oswald?" I said, "I thought Oswald was dead, Mae." She said, "That's not what Marguerite, his mother, told me. She said the person that was shot in the basement of the Dallas jail was not his mother, not her son." And she said, "He looked like Oswald," and I said, "He sure did." So she went home to check his signature because she had collected all the Oswald signatures. And I went home to look for the name Don Norton, and I found it in a rogues gallery. I think it's Paris Flamon's book, if not Buchanan's, but I think it was Flamon's book, as a courier of $50,000 from the mafia in Florida up to the Chicago mob on Kennedy's head. And I called her up and I said, "Mae, I've got, there's a Don Norton in the literature." So, he's using this name. And whether that Don Norton in the literature has anything to do with this guy or he's just using the name, I don't know. But, at least I found the name. And she said she checked all his letters and he never signed any of his letters. He just typed out his name, so she didn't have a signature to compare to. And then about a week or two after that, he disappeared from Akron. And John Armstrong and some of the other researchers kept tracking him and found another guy that they showed me a picture of. It looks pretty similar. Yeah.
The fishing store.
Yeah.
And when he realized he had been made,
Yeah.
he took off again.
So, but it would have been in Marguerite's interest, not to say that it wasn't her son, because then he would have been killed.
How about the particulars of Mae's death? What's your take on that?
Well, Mae ate healthy, and she ate organic, and she tried to keep away from bad things, and I think she was quite surprised that she got this fast-acting cancer. 27 of the key witnesses in the Kennedy case, by Penn Jones' count and other researchers, died of fast-acting cancers that could have been created out of the Ochsner labs and given to people. In 1956 at Fort Detrick, they began to employ a guy that in 1936 had developed cancer as a biological weapon for the Nazis. And he was brought over here under Project Paperclip, and he started working for the CBW people at Fort Detrick. Jack Ruby died of a very fast-acting cancer. He said he was being given painful injections. Same with Martha Mitchell. And that's right. And the thing that they were finding with these rats And Mary Sherman's experiments is that you could feed it to the rats or inject it into the rats, and they'd still get the tumors. And these very fast-acting melanomas. So she got this cancer, and I don't know whether she, for sure was murdered, but it was, suspicious given her lifestyle. I went out. She was already in the hospice under drugs, and I said, we've got to continue working with your material. She had 36 filing drawers, clipped 15 newspapers a day, 150 periodicals a month, read 300 to 500 books a year, and did a radio show every week for 853 weeks, and of course all these tapes and everything. And in the course of packing, on the day that she died, an A-frame house across from her caught on fire and burned down. We had to go out and hose the roof to keep her house from catching on fire, and the neighbors were doing the same thing. She was warned ahead of time by somebody that they were going to build that A-frame across from her to look at her. And when it went up, she went over one day to get a cup of sugar, and she said there was no furniture in it, just recording equipment. So they were watching her from there. The little Carmel Valley Register newspaper, the local paper, instead of saying this house that belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Smith burned down today, they said, we can't tell you who owns the house, we can't tell you who the occupants were, or if the occupants were the owners of the house, but this house at this address just burned down. And that was the specific day that she died, and people are.
What time when she was on the airplane? They went through all the luggage and lost stuff.
Yeah, when she came, in fact, to that trip, they were taking stuff out of her luggage even then, and so she would never put stuff in the luggage. She'd carry it with her if she thought it was important. She told me about that, but there were many attempts on her. But she was, if you think about it, intelligence is a vertical chain. In the intelligence agencies, you're on need to know, and the intelligence goes vertically down the pipe to you. Mae was a horizontal feed. You could listen to Mae as an intelligence agent and say, that's what I was doing in Dallas. Okay? So she had agents that would call her and tell her, look out for intersections today, and cars would nearly hit her. And, and she lost one of her daughters because of a car pulling in front of her and then hitting the brake real fast. And the guy just disappeared. He was working at Fort Ord. But, there were people that threatened her, but she, she was indefatigable, and she started the work, and she stuck to it. So I think, it's quite possible she was murdered, but I just think on the other side there were other people that wanted to keep her alive and keep the truth coming out.
Who's Mae? Is my first time.
Oh, Mae Brussell was, she was actually from the I. Magnin family, I. Magnin department stores. Her father was the leading reform rabbi in Los Angeles. They had a parting of ways because her father was on the Johnny Carson show and good friends with Richard Nixon, and when Mae started exposing everybody, it was all of his friends. And so she got cut out of the will and dumped. Her mother would slide her a little money on the side to keep her going. She went to Stanford University. She liked Frank Lloyd Wright. She studied architecture. She's a brilliant woman, and she married a doctor. But in 1963, she liked Kennedy. She liked the Big Sur and the hippie movement and the counterculture and everything. But she liked Kennedy and was supportive of him. And when he got killed, and she saw, Oswald, and I think it's reflective of her kind of compassion about the world that when Bonnie, the daughter that did get killed in that car wreck, was 5 years old, she saw Oswald being interrogated and saw the bruises on him, and she felt bad for him and went in her room and packed up her teddy bear to send to Lee Harvey Oswald. And Mae, and then her daughter saw Oswald killed, and Mae thought, what kind of a world am I bringing my child into? And that's what started her. But the early people who did the work on the Kennedy assassination, and a lot of us don't know it or don't hear it enough, were women. There was Sylvia Marr, there was Maggie Fields, there was Lillian Castellano, and they don't get enough credit because, like everything else, it's male-dominated fields, and but women broke the ground.
Story that you already heard, but I'm going to tell it because there are young people in here, and who knows if someday they might find something. I met Mae, I corresponded with Mae, and she sent me valuable documents about Oswald and Jaggers Chili Stovall and things like that, but I met her at Boston University in 1975 when there was a convention up there, and we had correspondence, so we kind of knew each other, and we're talking, and she looked at me, and just out of the blue, she threw this out. J. Edgar Hoover was killed with poison apple pie. She didn't tell me how she knew it or what she based it on. She just threw that line out. So if one of you guys years from now find some document about the possibility of apple pie, then Mae was right.
Well, I think the apple pie was probably metaphorical, but
Whatever.
there is some evidence that J. Edgar Hoover was murdered with curare derivatives put into his toothpaste by the anti-Castro Cubans on the night when he was meeting with Chuck Colson. And Chuck Colson hired 3 anti-Castro Cubans to dance on Hoover's grave 2 weeks before he died. And Hoover had no autopsy, was taken away in a hearse, and nobody ever saw the rest of it. But Hoover was not, he was an ideologue. He wasn't somebody that would shoot both Ted Kennedy and George Wallace. He had a point of view, and that isn't always of use to intelligence agencies that are trying to manipulate the
Russell
situation.
Baker is right about Nixon being sandbagged a bit. The fact that Hoover was dead, Hoover could have protected Nixon from Watergate, and with
Yes.
Hoover dead, right in the middle of it, or at the beginning of it at least, that would kind of seal Nixon's fate. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing. Get rid
Yeah.
of Hoover, and then Nixon's done for, because there's no one to...
Also, the person that came into power at the time of Hoover's death and was appointed in his place was L. Patrick Gray from Naval Intelligence. Naval Intelligence had penetrated the FBI in the 1940s through Cartha Deke Deloach and William Sullivan, who headed up Division 5, and COINTELPRO. They were ONI boys. They came in 42 and said, "We'll protect your turf from the CIA if you let us run the agency." And so ONI comes in. Patrick Gray fires all 10 heads of the Criminal Records Division the first day he's in office. And then they asked him at the end of the week, did Hoover keep personal files on people? And he said, they're not here. They weren't. They'd already moved out to the Pentagon. But of course they kept personal files and blackmailed people and kept people under their control. So, and it was L. Patrick Gray, remember, that kidnaps Martha Mitchell and gives her the painful injections out in California.
Something to do with suitcases.
And he just wrote a book in Nixon's Web. It's worth taking a look at.
Remember something about a suitcase with Chappaquiddick files or something? Gray? Do you remember something about that?
Yes.
I can't remember, but there was something.
No,
about-
that he had
a
access to
suitcase
some
of
Chappaquiddick stuff.
files?
Yeah, well, out of that team also was Tony Elazowitz, who was the New York cop that was sent to look into Oswald, and he shows up later as a bagman carrying money to keep the Cubans quiet and everything. I think it's wedging the Oldsmobile in the sand with Mary Jo dead in it so they can set him up. But he says he went up there to ask embarrassing questions of Ted Kennedy, but you go 3 days before, what embarrassing questions about what? And Elazowitz is not at any of the press conferences, but I went to Martha's Vineyard afterwards, and there were, the people there told me the island was crawling with Nixon's committee to re-elect the president people, with creeps. They were all over the place.
Wasn't Ted Kennedy under surveillance by the military in the
Yes.
late 90s, especially with regard, they were paranoid that their drug running schemes were going to be, Edward Cotello, that their drug running schemes were going to be
Well, if
revealed?
you kill half his family, you better keep an eye on him.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tony Ulasewicz. Maybe the Malcolm X connection should be mentioned too.
Why don't you make it?
He was in charge of the undercover operation for Malcolm X's murder. The same Tony Ulasewicz.
That's right.
And Mary Jo
If it ain't broke, you don't fix it.
Mary Jo Kopechne was roommates with somebody that was affiliated with Bobby Baker.
Yes, Carol Tyler, who disappeared in a plane in Alaska, similar to Boggs.
Yeah, she was playing with a pilot, and the plane just crashed. There was a guy who alleged that the wings had been sawed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's true.
There's
but
some
there
sabotage.
was
She died in a plane
pilot
crash.
And Carol Tyler were killed.
She also roomed with one of Ruby's girls. And she was an insider she was part of what were called the Boiler Room Girls, and a number of them were there that night, and they all moved way up in the tops of law firms, and Judy Woodruff was one, up to the top of the media. The girls that were in the cabin that night of Chappaquiddick did well, and it was almost to the day, all those many years later, that John Jr. goes down off of Martha's Vineyard in Chappaquiddick, almost to the day, with his murder. And so, but Mary Jo Kopechne knew a great deal. She was the last person to see the Chappaquiddick, the Robert Kennedy assassination materials. And She had come up, I believe, out of Smathers Camp and was not a friend of the Kennedys and helped set Kennedy up in that situation, not knowing she was going to be killed. But back to Mae Brussell, and then we should break for dinner. Mae Brussell called Mary Jo Kopechne's parents 3 days before Chappaquiddick and said, they're about to kill your daughter.
I'll be there.
And Mae used to tell me I shouldn't say I'm a researcher, I should say I'm a psychic, then they'd like me. Let's eat. Come back at 7, we'll have Walt Brown.
Yeah, some great questions there.
Check his temperature.
Affairs in the Realist magazine has for over 2.5 years shared with KLRB listeners the fruits of her decades research into political assassinations and the power in America. The weekly commentary on KLRB FM is the most hard-hitting and comprehensive report of its kind in the country, relating as it does the news of the week to the evidence emerging about the conspiracy which allegedly maintains its power by force over America's electoral and executive processes. Dialogue Conspiracy, a unique talk show. It's the most up-to-date, well-documented, no-nonsense political analysis going. And it goes over KLRB FM 102 on Monday afternoons at 5:15.
Good afternoon. Again, Dialogue Conspiracy. This is November 26th. I lost count. I think it's the 127th week of Dialogue Conspiracy at KLRB. We meet once a week and share the news of the week and how it pertains to past political assassinations. I had a vacation for a week and a half and went to Dayton, Ohio to speak at the university there. Had interesting experience speaking to the students in the afternoon, another group again in the evening. I haven't made any public appearances outside of California, out of our own state, the colleges and high schools, but I did go to Ohio, and it was very worthwhile to meet people in other area and see where their heads are at, see how much they know about conspiracies, how much they care, how much they're willing to listen, and see what kind of questions they're asking. The travel hasn't changed since the last trip I took with regard to my work when I went to New Orleans in '67 when I went to see Jim Garrison down there. This time I used another name, and I figured the Watergate people travel with an alias. I can do the same thing, but somebody still knows who you are. I used another name for my tickets, and I trust my baggage not to be checked through because it never arrives at the proper place, and it's always gone into, and I've learned not to take my notes or my books with me or reading material except what I put in my hand, so that my luggage, my clothing is on the airplane and the others in my hand. And I checked out of Monterey, and instead of sending everything straight through to Dayton, Ohio, United Airlines, I took it from Monterey to San Francisco and collected it there, and then rechecked it at San Francisco to Chicago, and then picked it up there at the gate, and then went from Chicago and checked it to Dayton. And then when I get into the Dayton airport, we all wait, and there's a thing that goes around and around, and everybody's waiting for their baggage, and people are waiting about 20 or 30 minutes and really restless because the plane has come and is ready to take off to the next place. And the luggage, the wheel goes around and around, and there's no luggage. And then I thought my suitcase was coming off. It was a green plaid suitcase. And I reached for it, and some woman said, "No, that's my suitcase," because it looked identically to mine. And she looked at hers and said, "Oh, somebody broke into hers." Hers was all, she opened it up just to see the clothing so we could be sure because they looked alike. And we didn't get out the stubs yet to check the numbers. And she said somebody broke into her suitcase. Her things had evidently been rearranged. And then my suitcase came off the circle, and I looked at mine, and the number, the stub that I had matched mine. And when I got to the house where I was staying and took the suitcase upstairs, my lock was torn off. And where the zipper in the lock is, the lock was completely torn off, just ripped off. Hers had gone into because they thought it was mine, evidently, but mine was locked, so they just ripped the lock off. And so when I traveled to the next city, I put rope and string around it just so the thing wouldn't fall open. There was still nothing in there but clothing. It was just the harassment. And then coming home, I was so tired of changing. I was on Western Airline, and instead of saying, okay, send it, I'll take it in San Francisco and again see that it gets on the plane back to Monterey, I checked it straight to Monterey. And again, when I arrive in Monterey, there is no suitcase, just like when I came home from Dallas or New Orleans, and everybody else's luggage checks through, but mine isn't there. And you leave your name at the airport, and it's delivered at my house later in the evening, around 7 or 8 o'clock at night. My suitcase is delivered to my home. I could go through my bathrobe or stockings or underwear, whatever they please. There wasn't anything in there, but it's just the idea that somebody knows you're going somewhere and manages. Every time I take a trip, whether it's in San Francisco to do radio shows, the car is broken into and things are taken, or the car is taken apart and things are, damaged in the car, or when I travel, somebody knows where I'm going, and it's a harassment of a kind I don't particularly appreciate, but at least I got there and back, and I'm grateful that I'm still alive. It kept me alive. At first I was going to take the train, but I took the plane. I wanted to talk about a few subjects that were important in the news this week, and to get into them, I have to refer to the article that I've mentioned several times on the show that was in Esquire magazine this last November. It's the Esquire of November 1973. There was an article called, "Did There Come a Point in Time When There Were 43 Different Theories of How the Watergate Happened?" And it's a tongue-in-cheek, facetious, half-assed article by Edward J. Epstein and John Barrett, which is not a complete account of the Watergate theories, and it certainly, if you read the article carefully, it can bring up more provocative questions than those people even want you to think about. But they think that if they have a tongue-in-cheek attitude, that people will pass these things off and not take them seriously because there's so many different theories. But my name was mentioned in 3 of those theories, and they're important because of the news that came out this week. So I want to briefly mention the 3 where they referred to me and my research and tell you the news that came out in the conjunction this week. One theory which they refer to is the grand scheme, the tip of the iceberg. The proponent is Carl Oglesby, who writes for the Boston Phoenix, Kirk Sale from the New York Review of Books, and Mae Brussell for the Realist, called the Yankees versus the Cowboy theory. And the thesis which they put in there is that the Watergate is merely one episode in a titanic subterranean war between 2 competing elites known in the underground press as the Yankees and the Cowboys. The Yankees are the Eastern establishment, the Oline interest, the Kennedys, Rockefellers, the liberal wing of the CIA, the Council of Foreign Relations, and the Cowboys are Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, the oil tycoons, Howard Hughes, Aristotle Onassis, Frank Sinatra. And it goes into the fact that since World War II, the Cowboys have been fighting the Yankees for control. And up till '63, the Yankees, through Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, warning of the military-industrial complex, and Kennedy, kept control of the military and the economy. But the Cowboys took over with the assassination of John Kennedy in Dallas. They referred this as the tip of the iceberg theory, and as I say, Carl Oglesby, Kirk Sale, and Mae Brussell were mentioned as the believers in the tip of the iceberg theory. Well, this week, Senator Baker, who's been one of the great apologists on the Senate Select Committee, who covers up Mr. Pretty Boy, who plays very stupid and asks asinine questions that are never pertinent and never really gets to the heart of the matter, who seems to be protecting Richard Nixon and his own self-interest by never having the proper witnesses or the proper questions asked. Even Senator Howard Baker had to admit publicly at a convention in Orlando, Florida, a newspaper convention of 400 newsmen, that the American people have only seen the tip of the iceberg. Now, this is Senator Howard Baker from Tennessee, who's on the Senate Select Committee. He says, as distasteful as it is to me, it is entirely possible that Watergate will not be over any time soon. He said he still wasn't sure why the Democratic National Headquarters in Washington were burglarized in 1972, or why the burglars broke in the office of Daniel Ellsberg, psychiatrist. I'm afraid the 100 or so loose ends won't be tied up by the time the committee issues its final report, Baker said. Because of the unanswered questions, he would recommend the standing Senate committees continue a sweeping public appraisal of the functions of the government and the officials who serve it. And he called on the press to continue your own investigation. Now that's really a garbled message, because he knows, first of all, he has the articles that I've written, and he knows about Louis Tackwood, and he knows about William Sullivan of Division 5 and Martha Mitchell. And he knows that there's evidence of...
I just wanted to, again, give you a little sense of Mae, but all of her 850 broadcasts are on 5 DVDs for $50, and that's probably one of the best investments you can make.
What website, is that the one Leo Stanis runs it, Mae Brussell website? Is that the one? Or?
I don't think Oceanic runs it. There's another guy that does it, but it's maybrussel.com, I'm pretty sure. So,
Going up to San Francisco, there was somebody who used to interview her occasionally the late night, overnight kind of host on, I think, KGO. It was, just maybe once a month or something.
I need somebody with more tech experience than me to shift to the next thing. Yeah, just getting a CD or DVD in and out of here. How to play it, I don't know.